Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. Today we're going to talk about a subject that may make some viewers uncomfortable, but it's a sad fact of life that we simply can't ignore, and that's sex abuse of children. You know, in the United States today, a child is sexually abused every 6 minutes, and that means that 240 kids per day suffer this kind of abuse. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused by the time that they're 18 years old. In fact, nearly 70% of all reported sexual assaults happen to children under 17 years of age, believe it or not. The average age of a victim is 9, but more than 20% were abused before their 8th birthday. 30 to 40%, and this kind of blows my mind. 30 to 40% of sexually abused children are abused by a family member. 50% are abused by somebody that their family knows. Only 10% are abused by strangers. Are we immune here in New Hampshire? Sadly, we're not. Over 2,000 children are interviewed by forensic investigators every year in New Hampshire for suspected sexual abuse, and 70% of these kids are between 3 and 12 years old. Today we're going to learn more about this atrocity. We're going to learn how to recognize the signs that a kid may be a victim. We're going to learn what to do to protect kids from sexual abuse, and we'll learn how maybe we can help here in New Hampshire. There are an estimated 39 million survivors of childhood sexual abuse in the United States. You know, sex abuse of children is an unpleasant subject to talk about. But, you know, any discomfort that we have is absolutely nothing compared to what a sexually abused child endures. This will be part 1 of a 2-part show. Today we'll be talking, and on part 2 we'll actually be taking a field trip so that you can learn even more about what we talk about today. Now, as you can see, I have 2 guests here. And to my left is a face that I hope is familiar to you by now, if you're watching Tell It Like It Is all the time, which you should be. Patricia LaFrance, and she's, as I said, no stranger to this show. She's our county attorney here in Hillsborough County, and she's had 12 years of experience as a prosecutor, during which she prosecuted many child abuse cases. She has volunteered her efforts to the Granite State Children's Alliance for years, and currently serves as the vice president of its board of directors. To my left is Kristie Palestino, who's the executive director of the Granite State Children's Alliance. In 2004, Kristie opened the Child Advocacy Center of Hillsborough County, and she's since conducted over 2,500 forensic interviews of children. In 2010, she became the director of the New Hampshire network of child advocacy centers, providing training and technical assistance to all of the child advocacy centers in New Hampshire. She was one of the first forensic investigators in our state, and she provides annual forensic interview training and advanced forensic interview training to multidisciplinary team members across the state of New Hampshire. Kristie is extremely active in the National Child Advocacy Center movement and participates in the leadership, exchange, and coaching projects with the Northeast Regional Children's Advocacy Center, and contracting with the National Children's Alliance as an accreditation site reviewer. Now, both of these women dedicate their lives, literally, to helping kids. And quite frankly, I don't know how they get up every morning and do it, but thank God that they're there to do it, because we have a whole lot of kids that need people just like these two to help them out. So, today you're going to learn a lot, and I welcome both of you here, and so happy that you took time out of your schedules. I know both of you go 100 miles an hour every day and every minute of your lives, and on a snowy day to boot, you're here. Kind of like what I'd like to do, and, you know, anywhere along the line, throw in what you want, or stop me, or say, no, we need to talk about this, okay? But maybe the first thing that would be helpful to people would be if you can tell them a little bit about the Granite State Alliance, what it is, and what the Child Advocacy Centers do.
Sure. So the Granite State Children's Alliance is the membership organization for all the child advocacy centers in New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, we have 10 child advocacy centers. And what happens at those centers is that we provide a neutral environment for child sexual abuse investigations. We also work with children who have been physically abused, as well as children who have witnessed a violent crime. But about 90% of our cases are sexual abuse. And what I like to describe when I'm describing what a CAC does is talk about what happened before CACs were in the picture. And what used to happen is that when a child would disclose that they had been abused, so let's say a child was in school and they told a teacher that they had been sexually abused, that child would then be interviewed by maybe the guidance department. They'd be interviewed by a school nurse. They would then be interviewed by the Division for Children, Youth, and Families, who would show up at the school with a tripod and a camera. Then they would be interviewed by a law enforcement agency, oftentimes at the police department itself. They'd be interviewed by prosecutors, victim advocates, medical personnel, mental health providers. Children were being interviewed on average 8 times for one disclosure that they were making.
That'd be scary for a kid.
That's extremely scary for a kid. It would be intimidating for an adult to be interviewed that many times. And so it was traumatizing to children, but also these cases were not going anywhere because 8 different people asking a child in 8 different ways what happened to them, you're going to elicit different answers, slightly different answers that would cause reasonable doubt.
Especially for a little one.
Of course, right. I mean, if you ask me 8 times what I had for Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, depending on how you ask me, I may forget the potato salad. So we had to start really looking at that. And so what happened is a gentleman named Bud Kramer, he was a district attorney at the time in Huntsville, Alabama, and then he moved on to be a U.S. congressman. He developed the Child Advocacy Center model, and he said, okay, we need to pull together all these disciplines, the police and the prosecutors and victim advocates and the CPS, the Child Protective Social Workers, and work on these cases together and bring the child to a child-friendly environment where they can be interviewed by somebody specifically trained in interviewing children. And so the CACs were born, and that was in the 80s, and now there's over 750 child advocacy centers across the country. So now what happens, let's bring us back to New Hampshire, is if a child discloses that they have been sexually abused, let's say at school, the school is automatically calls the local police department and or the Division for Children, Youth, and Families. Then a phone call is made to one of our local child advocacy centers. At that point, our staff works to coordinate that entire team. So we are the point person. We contact the prosecutor, the detective, the child protective service worker, the victim advocate, and we pull together a team. Everybody comes to the Child Advocacy Center. The child is interviewed in a separate room by a trained forensic interviewer specifically trained at interviewing children. And our interviewers know all the developmental needs of children. They know how to ask certain questions, what not to ask. And this interview takes place separately, and that whole team, all those investigators, are watching through a closed-circuit television monitor. So the interviewer wears an earpiece in her ear. The team can talk on this little microphone to the interviewer. Everyone's questions are getting asked, but that child only has to talk to one person. Clearly, that is much better for the child. And what they have found across the country is that when a child advocacy center comes into town, there's a 40% increase in prosecution rates. And the reason that is because it's just a much more collaborative investigative approach when everybody's working together. There's one interview, the team is working together, sharing information. And then what I think is one of the most important parts of a child advocacy center is that while that child is being interviewed, their parents or parent is being supported in our waiting room. It is critical that parents are supported during this time because 95% of these cases, the child and the family knows and loves the offender. And so this is rocking the world of the entire family. And if that parent is not supported, and denial is a strong thing, if that parent is not supported, they may have a difficult time believing that child, and that makes the child recant and say, you know what, it didn't happen, and the pattern goes on and on. So it is critical that we spend time with these parents, supporting them, giving them what they need for tools, helping them understand what happened. And so we work really hard with the non-offending parents. Oftentimes, we partner with our crisis centers to do that, which is a really great, strong partnership we have, where they are the advocates that sit with our families in that waiting room. And then they help us to track these cases and to support these families down the road and continue to check in with them. How are you? Have you gone to counseling? Can I help you set up your doctor's appointment? And really following these families so we carry them all along.
So a way better approach than years ago, then.
Absolutely.
No matter how you cut it.
And I got to tell you, as a prosecutor, these interviews are so strong because, and I'll pick up on something that Kristie said, is it's a child-friendly room. If you think about, you know, what used to happen, as Kristie said, a child sometimes might be interviewed in the backseat of a police car, believe it or not, with an officer who might be carrying a gun. I mean, they're in uniform. That's very, very scary, even to an adult, like Kristie said. This is a child-friendly room, but more importantly, I'm in another room as the prosecutor with that microphone asking the question. So, you know, 2 months down the road when I'm looking at the case file, I might say, wow, I need to find out this information because it wasn't asked of the child. So it's very important, like Kristie said, to have that input from the prosecution, from the police, from the child protective service worker, because we're all looking at different standards of proof and different areas. I might be thinking, you know, I'm thinking of a possible criminal charge, and there are so many variations with our sexual assault statutes. You know, the aggravated felonious sexual assault statute has about 20 or so different variants of how somebody could commit that crime. So it's very important, and you know, the forensic interviewers are trained in our laws, so they know kind of the ins and outs of the laws and what the quirks of one law might be as opposed to something different. So they're trained to do that, but you know, they're human, they might forget, and I'll say, wait, we need to find out, for instance, we might be looking at a statutory rape charge, which is, you know, commonly called statutory rape. It's somebody having either sexual intercourse or sexual penetration with a child between 13 and 16 years of age. However, if it's called a pattern offense, if this has taken place, and it's very specific in New Hampshire, if it's multiple times between 2 months and 5 years, that could be elevated to an aggravated felonious sexual assault instead of a felonious sexual assault. So it becomes very important for the prosecutor to say, wait a minute now, was this a one-time occurrence or was it an ongoing occurrence? So things like that, you know, we don't have to go back 3 months later and interview the child again and say, okay, we really need to find out where exactly did it take place, because I have to worry about, you know, sometimes people move. They move from Nashua to Hudson. I have to find out where did this assault take place. So it's very important that we have that team there right at the beginning. And as Kristie said, one of the most important aspects is to have that support for the family and the parents. Of, you know, obviously the non-offending parent if it's a parent who's abusing. So I can't tell you as a prosecutor, it's amazing the job that they do.
Well, just by virtue of the fact that, you know, your star witness, for lack of a better term, is a kid.
Right.
And kids can't express themselves the same way an adults can, obviously.
And more importantly,
Especially if they're very little.
They can also be, you know, if the wrong questions are asked, if leading questions are asked, you know, this is, you know, we saw this happening in the 80s with some of the child sexual abuse cases down in Massachusetts, that, you know, parents will get their child, and if they found out that little Susie down the street was molested by a neighbor, did he do this to you? Did he do that to you? That's the worst thing that could happen. The forensic interviewers know how to ask those open-ended questions, and more importantly, they're trained in, okay, this child is age 4. What are they capable of telling me? You know, you're not going to ask them dates and times because they don't have the capabilities yet. So they're trained in that. They know how to ask the correct questions without being obviously leading, because, you know, the worst thing is to falsely accuse somebody. You know, maybe not the worst thing, but certainly we don't want that to happen.
Right, because obviously that's a life-ruining situation.
Absolutely.
If somebody is falsely accused.
Which is really a good point, because the Child Advocacy Center is completely neutral. We don't work for the prosecutor's office. We don't work for the police department or for the Division for Children, Youth, and Family. We are there to find out the truth. And sometimes the truth is that nothing happened. Sometimes the truth is somebody told the child to say something happened. Sometimes the truth is somebody told the child to not say something happened when it did. And our job is to find out that truth, and that's it.
And what you just said, that was actually a case of that, oh gosh, I would say it was like maybe around the mid to late 80s. So I don't know if either one of you would even remember it. But somebody who was actually a police chief in New Hampshire of a small town went through a very rancorous divorce. And you know, the fighting didn't stop after the divorce papers were issued. It just was continuing. And they had one child, and of course the child also became the subject of many arguments. And at one point, his ex-wife did accuse him of sexually assaulting this little girl who, I don't know, she was maybe 3 or 4 at the time. And it turned out that he hadn't. But for months, he was front page news, and his career was totally ruined, totally devastatingly ruined. And I mean, obviously, that's not the prevalent thing, but as you said, it can happen, and you have to protect against that as well. Now, all of us, I think, you know, and especially people who work with kids or see kids or who have grandchildren or nieces or nephews or love the neighbor's kids or whatever, need to know what kind of signs are there that a child has been abused. I know that on your website you kind of talk about there's not just those physical symptoms, but emotional and behavioral symptoms as well. So, I mean, what do all of us need to be aware of that may signal that we're dealing with a kid who maybe has a big problem in his or her little life?
Go ahead, Kristie.
So there's multiple signs, but I do want to say what's really important is that there may be glaring signs and there may be very minimal signs, and you have to be careful. And sometimes if you see a child that exhibits some of these signs I'm going to talk about, that doesn't guarantee that child has been sexually abused. So there is a lot of gray there. But parents need to be, and people who are around children, they do need to be in tune with children. Some big signs are if a child's acting out sexually toward other children and aggressively sexually. This is above and beyond just the, you know, curious, let me show you mine, I'll show you, let me see yours, private part thing, but really acting out inappropriately. That's a sign, that's something. They've seen something, or children don't generally know that kind of information.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know.
Right,
No.
unless they saw it or it happened to them. And children who maybe suddenly become fearful of certain places, certain rooms, they suddenly develop certain phobias around things, that could be a sign that something is going on. Bedwetting with a child who has been, normally has been potty trained, everything's been fine, suddenly they begin bedwetting, that is also a sign. Now that is a sign of stress. So sometimes parents getting a divorce, things like that can lead to bedwetting too. So it really, again, you have to, changes in appetite, eating a lot more, eating a lot less, sudden changes in school performance, doing really poorly in school all of a sudden can be a sign. So there are many, many signs. What's important is that we're just in tune with our kids and we just recognize that maybe there's something going on. But we also have to look at who's around the children. And I know we'll talk about that later, but it's that's just as important as seeing how the child is reacting, is knowing the behavior of somebody who may be grooming you and your child.
Which is a scary thought, and obviously it does happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we do need to talk about that. Now, I know that, again, on your website, you list a bunch of different steps by which parents, grandparents, whatever, you know, any child advocate can help to protect kids.
Yes.
What are those kind of day-to-day things that we all need to know about?
So number one is learning the signs. So that's important, to be in tune with your children, learn the signs. Also, don't use trust as a basis for keeping your kids safe, because like I said, 95% of the time, these are people that you and your child know and love. These are people sitting around your Thanksgiving dinner table. They're people that are in your lives all the time. So just saying, oh, I trust him or I trust her, don't base that, your child's safety on that, because that is often what gets people in trouble. Use the facts. If a coach or a friend of the family suddenly wants to spend more time alone with your child than they spend with you, that's a red flag. If a coach offers to drive your child regularly by themselves in a car, that might be a red flag. Avoid having your children in situations where there's one child and one adult. You want to avoid that at all costs. You should always have at least 2 adults or other children around when your child is with other people. You also want to talk to your children. It's so important. People say all the time, they come into the CAC and they say, oh, I haven't talked to my child about good touch, bad touch, or sexual abuse because I didn't want to scare them. Well, what happens is if, God forbid, something happens to that child, they're actually more scared because they don't have a context to talk about it. They don't understand what happened to them. They're told to keep it a secret, and so they don't know. And so it's important just to have, as part of your family routine, when you're talking about safety and you're riding a bike, safety in the car with seatbelts, it's body safety and who's allowed to touch them and who could they tell if they don't touch, if they do get touched. And
just to add on to that
please.
too, a lot of the cases I see when the abuser, they start, especially with the younger children, they'll tell them, oh, this is natural between a father and a daughter. This is what they do. This is, I'm just trying to teach you. And, to adults, you're thinking, why wouldn't they know that? But a child, that's normal to them. A child growing up with that, sadly, that is normal. That's what fathers and daughters do. That's what how uncles teach their, nieces about be with boys. So what Kristie said is very important, that you teach your child, no, this is not appropriate. This is, if somebody says this to you, it's not appropriate. And another thing too is teach them, they would never be in trouble for telling. And that's a huge thing that we have in our cases, where the child, you ask them, in a nice way, why didn't you say anything? Well, he told me I'd get in trouble or I'd get taken away from mommy and daddy. And again, to a young child, they don't know, because they think now they
to hurt the mother or
absolutely,
father or another family member.
So it's equally important to tell them, listen, you will never be in trouble for telling the truth and telling me what happened to you.
And we also, to add on what Patty just said too, is children want to protect their parents. And because oftentimes it's somebody that they know, they're embarrassed or they're afraid to tell their parents. And so what we suggest is when you're talking to your child about what would happen if somebody were to touch them inappropriately, make a list. It doesn't have to be written down, but a list out loud. Who could you tell? Let's name all the people that you could tell, so that there's more people than just the parent.
Yeah, that's a really good practical idea.
Yeah, and also because, and what we often will say to kids is, and if that person doesn't do anything, you tell somebody else, and you tell somebody else until they do. And so that is really a critical piece, because oftentimes parents will say, oh, my child and I are really close. She'll tell me anything. I would know if something happened to her. And actually, if you and your child are really close, it's more likely the child won't want to tell you because they want to protect you. Children, even at the young age of 3, want to protect their parents. So really important.
Yeah. I mean, because I think the average person doesn't even think of that component of it.
Of course.
Truthfully. Right. Now, parents, and you just mentioned it, parents and grandparents are always told of the need to teach kids very early in their little lives about body safety. Now, what exactly do you mean by that, teaching them about body safety? And are there like do's and don'ts that you should be doing or not doing when you're teaching the little ones this stuff?
Go ahead, Kristie.
So, yes. Well, I want to say this, that it is important. Children should know. I mean, I tell people, even as you're changing your child's diaper, it's never too early to say, oh, mommy's cleaning your private parts, or it's just, and I'm allowed to because I'm your mommy, and it's those are really important things to just have as regular conversation. It's also,
even when they're that small.
Absolutely. There's no too early time. Or during, it's often good to have it during normal routine, bath time, bathing, things like that. When you go to the doctor, this is your doctor's, doctor's allowed to check your private parts because mommy or daddy are here. And it gives them that sort of basis of their body, and their bodies belong to them, and they are in charge of their bodies. What's important to know, though, is that, again, and I know I keep saying this, so I'm really trying to drill it home, is that oftentimes the child knows the person, and oftentimes the person has authority over the child. It's really hard for a child to say no to somebody who has authority over them. We teach children, you don't say no to an adult. I tell you what to do, right? That's what we teach children.
Yeah, obey.
So we have to give them the tools of teaching them about their body parts that are private, but we also have to know that it's our job as adults to keep our eye on what adults are around our children. And also, if I could say one more critical thing, is that teach children the correct name for their body parts. When you have tricky names, like bunny, things like that, makes it very complicated when a child will say somebody touched them on their bunny, when that somebody won't know what that means, and so that may not go anywhere. It's really important to just be accurate.
Point. Yeah,
Teach
no,
your children
that's something that
correct
I never
names.
even would have thought of. Yeah.
People try to be cute and funny, but it's
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
could be detrimental down the road. So
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially again with a young child who maybe would blurt out something to their preschool teacher or what have you. It would be something so innocuously worded that the teacher might go, "Oh, really?" And
Exactly.
not even ask another
Yeah.
question.
I know, because I mean, if a preschooler said to a teacher, "So and so touched my bunny,"
Yeah.
oh, okay. Well,
Could mean
the
that
teacher
stuffed
might think it's a
animal,
stuffed
yeah.
animal.
Right.
So
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And again, I mean, these are the type of things that I think people really need to know.
Yes.
Because again, I mean, I think people are conscious of these things happening, and I think most parents, hopefully, have it in their heads that they need to be aware of it and protect their kids from it. But I don't know that like everybody gives it a whole lot of thought, all these little nuances, because it's a big subject.
Yes.
And it's
yes.
not something that you can just know.
Right.
I mean, the average, because you're both working in it, but the average layperson probably, doesn't have a clue on some of this stuff.
Right.
Now, I'm a Luddite. I will admit this, and people have heard me say this over and over again. I am like an internet computer Luddite. I do only what I have to, kind of get dragged into it kicking and screaming, otherwise I'd never be able to communicate with anybody. But obviously this is not the case, for most of the world, it seems. In my opinion, and I don't know if it's 100% wrong, to me, and my husband and I go back and forth on things like this all the time, I believe that the internet has opened a whole lot of doors to crazies out there. And, years ago, I mean, this is nothing new to, this generation or anything. I mean, this probably from the beginning of time, children been abused by somebody. But it just seems as though it's so explosively big now. And my little, functioning brain, it almost seems to me that, the whole internet is feeding some of these people. Yeah. And, that maybe years ago they would have been a little more circumspect in their activities. Mm-hmm. That now, because there's so much acceptance of so much craziness, that it's kind of fueling them.
Yeah. Well, I heard an interesting fact. I went to a training a few years ago down at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, mm-hmm. and they actually said what people typically call child pornography, but mm-hmm. in New Hampshire we call it what it is, child sexual abuse images, that it was virtually eradicated before the internet. And
really?
Now yes. And not to say it was completely gone, but the internet has just, unfortunately, just exploded that. I mean, we have...
It's huge business now.
It is,
there are
and
people
it's
making millions of dollars.
Sadly, with webcams, you can have it like on demand. You can have somebody viewing a person abusing a child and saying, okay, now do this to them. And that's how bad it is out there. And yes, it is. It makes you shudder.
It does.
But people need to understand that the internet, with your children, you would never let a stranger into your child's bedroom, but yet people install webcams and computers in their child's bedroom and they have no idea what's going on. And it's frightening to me as a parent, as a prosecutor, to see what's happening to some of these children on the internet.
Now, what are some of the things that people can do, to protect their online identity or to control, what the kids have access to or what's coming into the home via the computer? And what about things like Facebook and so on? I mean, that all the kids seem to be in on it. I'm shocked at how young. I mean, I always thought it was like teenagers, and I'm hearing about people who say their 8 and 9-year-olds have Facebook accounts, which kind of blows my mind.
Right.
What about all this? I mean, what can parents do, related to any of these things? I mean, do you just take your chances and try to keep an eye on that computer and make sure it's in the family room where you see the screen?
Well, that's a good point. Yes, that's one. And Kristie, I don't know if you want to jump in here. And
I was going to say, Patty, what she had said. It's critical that the internet is in a place where there's full access, where everybody can see. You do not want to have the child be able to be really on the internet without any kind of parental guidance. There are different controls that you can install, but I have to tell you, children are savvy and they know a lot more than us about how to get
when you see
through
them
this
5
stuff.
years old sitting
Right.
there, you know,
Sure.
it's
And it goes down to the smartphones, and so it's really, again, it's really about communication and constant communication with your child, the ability, knowing all their passwords to their accounts. If they are a teenager and you feel as a family that the child it can have a Facebook account, which is the thing to do, make sure you have their password. Make sure you're able to get on there and watch what's going on. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. People say, "Oh, it's their privacy." No, they're a child,
give me privacy.
and
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And so it's really communication, having things be out there. The cases that we see, or that I've seen, and Patty's seen a lot more than me. You know, the children are in their rooms alone in the wee hours of the night with the webcams on their
Especially
cameras.
teenagers.
Yes, and parents think they're doing a good thing because they got Sally a really great computer for her room, and that's what's happening. And
I mean, kids will tell stories. You know, in my day, probably the daringest thing you did was, you know, beg and plead for the use of the family car because you had to go to the library to do research for your term paper, when in fact, you know, the library was driven by.
Right.
But it's a whole different world now. Can a parent do anything? And I honestly don't know. If you had a kid, and can you somehow contact Facebook and say to them, absolutely under no circumstances is my child allowed to open an account? Or is it so freewheeling that the kid will figure out a way to do it anyway?
kids can figure,
It's
I mean,
kids
will
will
Facebook
always,
even
you know,
listen
most
to you?
kids know more than their parents about the
Will
internet
Facebook
and
even
Facebook,
listen?
right?
I mean, if
right.
you called Facebook, would they pay a bit of attention, or would
You
they,
know, I think theoretically, I think
Yeah.
Facebook does have a thing. I'm 18 and older, click.
Yeah, but you know, anybody can
You
lie
know,
on
you don't
that.
have to show an ID before you
Yeah, really.
Right.
open up a Facebook account. So
I mean, I
there's
could
really
say I
no-
was 19. Who would know I wasn't,
Right.
right?
Right.
Except
Oh,
the
yeah.
people who knew me by name, and they'd go, yeah.
right.
right, and you know, people open up false accounts too, as a
That's true, too.
you know, a 15-year-old
Yeah, that's true,
girl
too.
from Minnesota talking to a, you know,
That's true,
15-year-old
too.
boy, and lo and behold, they're a, you know,
Some
48-year-old
pervert.
man from, yeah,
Pervert.
yeah. And it's unbelievable the amount of information that kids will put out there on their Facebook page.
That's
I
what's
could go to
frightening.
probably any
Yeah.
Facebook page of any kid in any local school and find out exactly what I need to know, and it's very frightening.
Well, you can
that-
even find out where they are with all their
Right.
tweetings and everything. You
Well,
know,
now
on
the
their way to
GPS,
Walgreens.
yes.
You
Right.
know, I mean that I find just absolutely staggering.
Yeah, and then the pictures themselves are,
Yeah.
you know,
yeah.
putting those pictures out there, they're there forever.
Yeah.
People don't realize that, and children especially don't realize
don't.
that because they're kids. They don't understand the concept of sometimes forever. When you put a picture out there, it might be something you're sending, you know, you're a teenager sending a picture to your boyfriend, and I've had a case where it ends up on a porn site.
Yes.
So,
And you can disable, just also for people to know, so cell phones are important. A lot of people have them, a lot of kids, the parents want their kids to have them, but you can disable the camera function on one of those smartphones.
Oh, you can?
And yes, and there are ways
And
that you
the
can
kid
go
can't
in.
beat it?
Right. Well,
Well, we hope.
Right.
Hopefully.
Right.
Hopefully they're not so techie savvy they can beat it. Now, what should a parent do to protect maybe their kid's identity online? Is there anything that a parent can do? I mean, assuming that, you know, you're okay with, say, for instance, your kid going on Facebook or whatever, and the kid doesn't seem to want to go on to it for any bad reasons, but yet you got a little bit of a problem with the whole world knowing that, you know, your child lives in Nashua and goes to such and such a school or whatever. Is there something you can do to...
well, I think that's why it's important to communicate with the child. That's why it's important to have the login information for your children so that you can go on and say, if they put it on there without you knowing it, that you can say, nope, that needs to come down, that needs to come out. And just have, you know, rules in your family about what's allowed to be on Facebook and what's not, and then follow up and check on them.
and schools also give you, I know at least my school does, gives you the option at the beginning of the year whether you want your child's name published and, you know, say that, you know, a newspaper goes to the local school, the kids in the spelling bee, or they did a science project. I know my school lets me opt out of having my kids' names published, and I'm probably every school does. I don't know. I'm only one school district, so I always choose that option because I want to control where, you know, my children's name. My name, I'm a public figure, obviously, and of course, because I ran for office, some of that information is out there. But
Well, by
I really
nature of
want
your
to,
job too.
right.
I mean, you're not dealing with 100% nice people all the time. So certainly you wouldn't want some of those folks having personal.
And it was a
details
fight.
about
They
your
wanted their name
family.
in the yearbook, and I relented on that. But
Well, the yearbook.
right, yeah.
But I have noticed newspaper photos and so on now, more and more, you're just seeing a child's first name. They're not adding in the last name.
Right.
Right.
Probably smart, really. Now, what about, what should a parent know? I mean, obviously when you're, well, I mean, if you, whether they're in the public school or you're choosing a school, what should a parent know or make it a point to know about their kids' schools and about summer camps, where kids maybe, or any kind of camp, sports camp or whatever, where the kids are going away, staying overnight, that kind of thing, school trips. What kind of questions should a parent be asking or be looking for?
I think one of the most critical things is, like I'd said before, is that making sure that there are rules and regulations that no camp counselor is ever alone with a child. And you can come right out, don't worry about being the squeaky wheel. You can say, what are your rules about this? Because if it's a good camp, it's an accredited camp, it's been through the training, they will know no camp counselor is allowed to be alone with a child. And so you want to make sure that that is in place. And you want to find out, have they been trained on this kind of thing? Have they been trained on awareness around sexual abuse and kind of what not to do and what to do, and et cetera. So that's really the key piece right there, is the alone. Now, I want to say, though, that there are times when it's another child that is abusing a child. So in a place like camp, that could certainly happen. And you're going to have children that are around together. And with that said, and I hate, Patty and I were always the downers, but you just never know when that is.
No, you don't.
You know, you can't be there 100% all the time. So what's important, again, is communication with your child, is making sure that before that child goes to camp, that they've had years of being able to talk to you. So if something has happened to them, they can tell, and they can make sure, or they can have, know when something doesn't feel right, and they can get out of a situation. But when it comes to the camps, yes, it's very important to make sure that there's rules about one-on-one.
Now, kids a lot of times will see something or witness something or maybe even inadvertently be part of something and not tell because they don't want to be the squealer. How do you get around that?
It is tough. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, they'll just tell and everything will be fine.
Yeah, because some of them
But, I think it's, again, instilling in your child the sense of, doing what's right. And we teach that with, bullying too, another subject we kind of get into at the child advocacy centers. But
yeah, because
it is hard,
a lot of it degree,
but
doesn't it?
But, this isn't, Johnny took Susie's test and ripped it up. This is, Johnny is touching Susie inappropriately. So it's, I think if you teach your children, maybe you don't squeal about the little things like somebody pulled somebody's hair or something, but when somebody's being hurt, absolutely they should tell. And if there's any, retribution, then it's the parents and the child who's abusing should be held accountable.
Now, kind of sticking with the school issues a little bit, I noticed that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children say that 30% of abductions, actual abductions, happen when a child is going to or from school or to and from a school activity. So what would you say to a parent about what they need to kind of go over with a kid who has reached that age where they're old enough to, be going back and forth to school or a sports field or whatever without adult, accompaniment? What do they need to know to keep themselves safe? Just the practical aspect of it.
Well, I will say, so we talk a lot about how it's oftentimes somebody that the child knows, who a sexual abuse case. And we have to remember there are going to be those times where it is a stranger. And what, you know, what we always say is, again, talking to children, teaching them that there are people out there. Somebody may tell you that they know me. Somebody may tell you that it's okay to get in the car, and to just always say no, unless I or another parent specifically said, you can go with this person if you see them. But to just be really clear and make, you know, we do want to talk to kids about that still, even though the chances are less than being abused by somebody that they know. It's still out there for sure. And so just being very clear, you know.
Now, we've all heard that sometimes people have been successful at getting a kid to willingly get in a car with a story like, oh, your mother or dad got hurt and I was sent to pick you up. Or, oh my goodness, have you seen my dog? And, you know, you weep and wail, and, oh, can you please help me find my black dog? And, of course, kids love animals. How do you kind of get that through a kid's head, too, that no matter how sad the story, or if they say, you know, I'm supposed to bring you to the hospital because your mother and father were in a car accident or whatever, how do you teach a kid to be able to kind of go through the thought process and go, no?
You just go through those scenarios. I know I used to go through them with my children. I'd have them in the car, usually they're captive audience. So, and, you know, got to the point where like, I know, Ma, never get in the car. And I said, good, but really, I mean, I try to go through every possible scenario. Somebody would be looking for a lost dog. Somebody would be, hey, I have some candy. You know, it's the cliche, I have candy, but, you know, to a little kid, you know, or, you know, ice cream. And so, yeah, you try to go through every scenario. And you don't want to scare them, but at the same time you say they're not there to help you, they want to hurt you, and you should never, ever, no matter what they say, should never get in anybody's car or go near it. You should run away. And, you know, it's a kind of a funny story. My son we were at a restaurant, he had gone to the bathroom and he had a Patriot shirt on. And this guy was in the bathroom, and he just commented, "Oh, you like the Patriots?" And my son ran out of the bathroom, "Stranger danger!" And, you know, so I guess it was good. Probably embarrassed the guy a little bit, but you know what? Better safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
You know, so
absolutely. Is it a good idea for, you know, a parent, like if I had a little one, to say to them, you know, if somebody ever says to you that mom and dad were in an accident, or grandma got taken to the hospital and your mother told me to pick you up or whatever, is it good to like actually give them a solution to that, you know, to say to them, if something like that would ever happen, this is what I would do.
The police would come and talk to you, not a person.
Okay, so that they actually have a concept.
Yes.
All right, yeah.
Or, you know, an aunt or uncle, somebody who's trusted.
Who you know.
You know, if I could never get to you.
So kind of like a plan that they know that, okay, this is okay.
Yeah, it's just like, you know, you plan for these situations, just like, you know, you have the fire drills in your house. You know, if there's ever a fire, you're going to meet at the mailbox. It's the same thing. If anything were ever to happen, here's what we would do.
And of course, repetition obviously helps.
Yes.
The more you say it, right?
Yep.
Now, can we, you know, get into teenagers a little bit? Because that's obviously a whole different element.
That's a whole other show.
Yes, it is.
We'll try to condense it, Kathy.
Yes. Maybe, you know, if you could kind of let people know what the sex abuse laws actually are in New Hampshire, so that kids themselves can understand what constitutes sex abuse. I mean, does this mean that some guy, you know, grabs her, or a girl, and is all over her, and that's the only thing she can complain about? Or, you know, is it way less than that she actually is cause to complain? And again, maybe kind of get a little bit into what they need to know about the internet and this whole sexting craze that goes on. Because that, I guess, I mean, maybe it's younger now, but isn't that kind of more or less the high school activity rather than the younger kids, the sexting? At least now.
Yeah.
At least
Junior
now.
high.
Right.
God.
Junior high, high school.
High, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
So I don't know.
I know you want me to talk about the law. Yeah, I can talk about the laws. You know, well, we have, as I said earlier, we have a lot of variations on, you know, there's essentially 3 levels of sexual assault in New Hampshire. There's Class A felony, which would be aggravated felonious sexual assault. And there's, like I said, about 20 or so variations as to how somebody, you know, there's the forcible rape. There's any sexual penetration of a child under 13 is automatically an aggravated felonious sexual assault. So we have those variations, and as I said before, it can elevate a felonious sexual assault, which is a Class B felony. That would be what people sometimes call statutory rape, where the child is between 13 and 16 years of age, and it's sexual penetration. You know, you have the
and in that case, it doesn't even matter if, say, for
it
instance,
does
the
not
girl
matter.
said,
Nope.
okay,
There is no
she thinks
defense.
she's in love.
No, it's
Okay.
not. We don't call it consent. We call
Okay.
it compliant victim. It's not consensual. It cannot be consensual. The child does not have the capability to consent.
So that does not
They're
absolve.
compliant is
Right.
what we call it. But again, that can elevate to an aggravated felonious sexual assault if it's ongoing abuse. It's between, you know, it went on for a period, one or more times, more than once, 2 months and 5 years, so between that time frame. And again, you see that a lot with, you know, this 13-year-old girl who's in a, you know, what she calls a relationship, and I use that term loosely, with a 22, 23-year-old. You know, if that goes on over time, that becomes aggravated felonious sexual assault. So, you know, those are, and then sexual assault is a misdemeanor, and that could be sexual contact, not actual sexual penetration, but it could be sexual contact. So there's, you know, varying degrees depending on the age, depending on what happened during the actual, you know, sexual act. So there's a lot of variance of what a person could be charged with, but, you know, we have attempt statutes too, you know. For instance, we just had, the Supreme Court came back on a case of mine down in Nashua. He lured a girl onto the bike path and he pulled down her pants and she got away. She knew, you know, to run away. He didn't do anything, thank God, you know, but he was convicted of attempted aggravated felonious sexual assault because she was 6 years old.
Oh,
so, you know, and there was no other I argued, obviously, in court, there was nothing else that he was planning to do with her on that secluded bike path than attempt to sexually assault her. So, and he was convicted, and his conviction was upheld for that one. His conviction got reversed on an attempted kidnapping. It was, you know, that's okay. He was sentenced and in prison on the attempted aggravated felonious sexual assault.
Now, we all know that, unfortunately, there are crazy parents. And I don't know if you've ever, you know, faced this in New Hampshire or not, but I mean, obviously there have been crazy parents who have let somebody move into their home to live and cohabitate with their underage daughter. In a case like that, and sometimes grandchildren have resulted of that, in a case like that, can you bring charges against the parents as well for neglect or anything?
Yes,
you can.
You know, depending on the circumstances, absolutely, and that's again another great thing about the Child Advocacy Center interviews is we have DCYF there, we have the prosecutors there, and we're asking the right questions. Okay, what did mom know about this? So yeah, I mean, you know, if the facts are there, we will absolutely charge a parent, and we have, you know,
because I mean, it would seem as though they should be charged. They're
right,
not
and
protecting their child.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Kristie can answer this too. Is a lot of people say anytime, say a parent is abusing, you know, a father is abusing a child, how could the mother not know?
I know.
She should be charged too, and that's really, you know, you hear that a lot, and you know, unfortunately, you can't always charge the person. They might have no idea. They might work nights, and dad's abusing the child.
That's possible,
you know.
So, of course, what drives
and I
me
don't know,
crazy,
Kristie wants
though,
to talk
is
about
when
this
you,
too.
You know, when you see somebody, a mother or less often a father, where a child is being beaten. And, you know, has very obvious physical injuries. It always amazes me that a lot of times there's no charges brought
and it's
against
fact
the mother,
driven, and it can
should be her.
Yeah, it's very case
She's
specific.
more guilty as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned than the guy who's smacking her kid. You know.
And unfortunately, in those cases too, there's domestic violence involved, and I think that is could be taken into consideration. So, you know, especially with the sexual abuse cases, that we find that sometimes is the case.
Scary. I don't know how you guys do it every day. I really don't. I really and truly don't. Now, I know that, you know, so much of your work, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock here.
I am too.
Yeah, I know it, huh? I know much of your work involves the investigation, and that's so particularly important, especially if there's ever going to be a conviction in court of a child abuser. how, now you had gotten a little bit into how it's handled with the child, in a safe place, a child-friendly environment. They're not, subjected to crowds of people or multiple interviews or whatever. But what must or must not happen with the parent or caregiver as all of this is going on? I know you said you give them support and such, but, are you expecting them to play some kind of a role? And if so, where should their role stop? What should they stay the heck out of so that you people can do your job to ultimately get the best results?
It is.
Kristie's given this speech a million times to parents. So
Good.
Well, what we tell parents is to support their child. Just tell them you're proud of them. You did a good job. We're so happy that you told. And even if a parent is feeling uneasy, having a hard time with it, don't tell your children that, to just support them and that, we're proud of you. Do not ask your children questions. If a child wants to talk to you, either before the interview or after the interview, absolutely listen. Don't ever shoot your child down and not listen to them. But it's very important that you don't ask a whole bunch of questions, because you may not realize it, but because of your high emotions, you may be asking questions that are leading the child, putting things in their mind. It may compromise the case somehow because you got involved. And if everybody just wants to find out the truth, then it's best just to let the investigators. And if the child does say something, even after the interview, that concerns you, that maybe this child didn't tell the interviewer everything, then absolutely call one of the team members, the prosecutor or the detective, and say, this is what my child said, maybe she needs to be re-interviewed because she's bringing up more information. And that does happen. But really, and Patty, I'd be happy to hear what else you have to say too, but I mean, really just not asking questions it's hard to do as a parent, but really important.
Right. And after the interview, I mean, we'll bring the parents back, and a lot of times the parent might be the person the child initially disclosed to, so they kind of have an idea. Susie said that Uncle Bob did this to her, and brought to the interview, she confirms that. So we'll give a brief overview to the parent. She did disclose, consistent with what she told you, and we always tell the child, or the interviewer does, if you ever want to come back and talk to us, you have more, just let mom know that you want to come back. We always leave that door open, and we tell the parents that too, which is important because I'd say, and Kristie probably knows the numbers better than that, the majority of disclosures, they don't just spill everything at once. It comes in little bits and pieces.
Sure,
and plus a child might not be ready to disclose. There could be, maybe there was a picture found or something of the child, and then we realize something is going on with this child, but the child might not be ready to talk about it. So we'll get a little bit out of them. And then they may talk to mom even a month or two down the road and say, Mom, I didn't tell them everything. I was scared. I want to go back. I want to talk to them. So it's very important that we leave the door open for the parents as well. But again, as Kristie said, can't stress it enough. If they do start talking, certainly listen to them, but don't ask questions. And then, you would ask, do you want to go back and talk to Kristie or, one of the other interviewers and tell her? And, we have had children come back and say, okay, they're ready now. So,
well, wasn't one of the cases that you had referred to earlier, the Massachusetts back some years ago?
The Fells Acres.
Yeah. Didn't one of those kind of get blown out of the water because parents or somebody used stuffed animals to ask the kids to demonstrate?
Right. Right.
And that was in the days before the internet. Can you imagine now if Fells Acres, that everybody's on the email copying everybody? Susie said so-and-so did this to her. Ask your children if you did that too.
Right. Yeah.
It could, and that's why, again, the child advocacy centers are so important to ask the right questions the right way.
Right.
Now, have you, as a prosecutor, have you seen a case go down the chute because a parent did ask the wrong question, or the defense attorney was able to say that the parent put these things into the kid's mind?
Yeah, personally, I don't think I've ever. No, not really. No. I mean, because I've been going. We've had the Child Advocacy Center since 2004 in Nashua, which is where I worked for the majority of my career.
But
so
it has happened, though, right?
I think in the olden days it did, and we always try to tell the parents, and they always, some of them want to know exactly everything that happened, and I always say to them, listen, after the case is completely over, I can tell you, but they might be a witness, so I don't want to tell them everything and corrupt what they know as a witness. I do that with any witness, whether it's a, a stabbing or a sexual abuse case. So I tell them, when the case is over, I will tell you whatever you want to know, but for now, let's get through this. Let's get a conviction, or let's get through the case, and then I can tell you whatever you want to know.
Well, we're kind of getting very close to when we have to stop, and we are, as I said, we are going to do a part 2 to the show where we'll have a chance to kind of explore more. And if any of you have any questions, you can certainly email either of these ladies, or you can send me an email saying, hey, the next time you get together with them, will you ask them this, and I'll do it. But meanwhile, until we do that second show and you'll actually get to see one of the centers, I want to ask you, how can people help? Can they, do you have fundraising efforts? Do you have volunteer opportunities? Can people donate goods or services that you might need?
Kristie is chomping at the bit over there, Kathy, to tell you.
Help with public education? Let people know.
So we have a lot of opportunities. We just started a volunteer program where we are putting together a training to actually train volunteers who want to provide some victim advocacy for some of our families. In this down economy, it's hard for our crisis centers to keep up with our demand, and so we're doing a statewide effort where we're looking at training volunteers to actually come into the centers and help us with supporting the families. It's a very big job. It would entail, just like applying for a job, it would entail background checks and 40 hours of training, and but it's very rewarding. We also have many opportunities where we are going to be doing outreach in our communities. We're launching our One with Courage campaign, which is a tour that we're going around the whole state to educate people on child sexual abuse, how to protect your kids, how to learn the signs. And certainly as that goes on and gets bigger, if people would like to be trained in helping us to do those, that would be great. We have multiple fundraisers all around this local community as well as statewide, where we're always looking for volunteers to help. And certainly funding, we really support on individual relationships and donations to support our centers. We are very much community-based. We get minimal amount of money from any federal or state money, so it's the community that helps.
Yeah, and I just want to point out too, even though they work with my office, which is the county attorney's office, this is a nonprofit group, so they're not, it's not like they're funded by the state. Right. So they do rely on donations, and we have our annual gala for this county coming up in May. May 4th. So we're always looking for donations. Yes. Okay. So
we will post all that info.
Yes, and we've been very, I think, successful in Hillsborough County with our gala, but it's a continuing struggle. And we're always looking for new people to volunteer and become kind of our benefactors for the organization. So, but it's important people know that they are not funded through the state.
Well, ladies, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you,
Kathy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I told you you'd hear plenty today, and I think you did. And you know what? You really have to let it sink in. And you really have to be aware of this and continue to be aware of it. And you have to help out in some fashion or another. I want you to watch for part 2 of the show. And I started out saying it might be an unpleasant subject, but you know what? It's one we all owe it to the kids of this world to be aware of. So watch for part 2. We'll advertise it. And thanks for watching today. Until next time, bye-bye.